In a small village in southeastern Poland, far from the grand theatres of war and the attention of history books, a quiet act of extraordinary courage was unfolding. It was the autumn of 1942, and Josef and Victoria Ulma were about to make a decision that would define not just their own fate, but the fate of their 6 young children and 8 desperate strangers who had nowhere else to turn. The village of Markowa seemed worlds away from the massive battles raging across Europe, but the shadow of Nazi terror had reached even this remote corner of Poland. Here, in their modest farmhouse, the Ulmas opened their door to 8 Jewish people who were running for their lives. 6 members of the Sal family from nearby Wankut, along with 2 daughters of Chaim Goldman, found refuge in what would become both their sanctuary and, tragically, their tomb. What drove an ordinary farming family to take such an unthinkable risk? Under Nazi occupation, the rules were brutally clear. Anyone caught helping Jews wouldn't just face death themselves. Their entire household would be executed. Every member of the family, every child. The Nazis had designed this policy deliberately, knowing that the threat to one's children would be enough to stop most people from acting on whatever compassion they might feel. But Josef and Victoria Ulma weren't most people. Perhaps it was their deep Catholic faith that compelled them to see the divine spark in every human being who needed help. Perhaps it was simply an unshakable sense of right and wrong that wouldn't allow them to turn away from suffering. We can't know exactly what was in their hearts during those quiet conversations in their farmhouse, but we know what they chose to do. For over a year, from that autumn of 1942, through the winter and into 1943, 8 Jewish people lived hidden in the Ulma family's attic. Can you imagine the delicate choreography of daily life under such circumstances? Every footstep had to be calculated. Every voice kept to a whisper. The Jewish families could only venture out when it was absolutely safe, when darkness provided cover or when the neighbors were far enough away not to notice. The Ulmas shared everything they had. In a time when food was scarce and every family struggled to feed their own children, they divided their meager rations with 8 additional people. The hidden families weren't just passive recipients of this generosity, though. They found ways to contribute, helping with work around the farm whenever they could, trying to earn their keep even while living under the constant threat of discovery. Think about Victoria Ulma during this time. She was managing a household with 6 children, including infants and toddlers, who couldn't possibly understand why they had to be quiet sometimes, why there were extra people whispering in their attic, why food was even more scarce than usual. She was pregnant with their 7th child, carrying new life, while surrounded by the constant possibility of death. Every day, she made breakfast and tended to her children and helped care for 8 people whose very presence in her home was a death sentence waiting to be carried out. And Josef, he continued working his farm, interacting with neighbors, maintaining the facade of normalcy while knowing that discovery could come at any moment. Every knock at the door must have made his heart race. Every unexpected visitor was a potential catastrophe. Yet he persevered, day after day, month after month. The terrible truth about such acts of heroism is that they often depend not just on the courage of the rescuers, but on the silence and complicity of entire communities. In Markowa, some neighbors likely suspected what the Ulmas were doing. Some may have approved, others may have worried, but most chose to look the other way. Unfortunately, not everyone made that choice. In March 1944, after more than a year of successfully hiding their Jewish guests, the Ulmas' secret was betrayed. A local collaborator named Włodzimierz Lesh, who had already proven willing to trade Jewish lives for German favor, denounced the family to the Nazi authorities. It's heartbreaking to think that, after surviving the most dangerous early months, After developing routines and relationships and hoped that they might all make it to liberation, they were undone by the greed and moral bankruptcy of someone from their own community. On March 24, 1944, German police surrounded the Ulma farmhouse. There would be no trial, no consideration of circumstances, no mercy for the children involved. The Nazi policy was clear and would be carried out with mechanical efficiency. Josef and Victoria were executed along with their 6 children, the youngest still a toddler, and one who would never draw breath, as Victoria was killed while pregnant. The 8 Jewish people they had sheltered for over a year were also murdered, 16 lives snuffed out in a single morning because a farming family had decided that human decency demanded they help their neighbors survive. The local villagers were forced by the Germans to bury the victims, a final cruelty designed to traumatize the entire community and send a message about the consequences of resistance. After the war, when Poland was liberated and people could finally speak openly about what had happened, a Jewish organization took responsibility for the remains of the 8 Jewish victims, ensuring they received proper burial according to their faith. But the story of the Ulmas didn't end with their martyrdom. In the decades that followed, as the world began to grapple seriously with the Holocaust and to seek out stories of rescue and resistance amid the overwhelming darkness, the sacrifice of this Polish farming family began to receive the recognition it deserved. In 1995, more than 50 years after their deaths, Yad Vashem, Israel's official memorial to Holocaust victims, honored the Ulmas with the title, Righteous Among the Nations. This recognition is reserved for non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jewish people during the Holocaust, and it placed Josef and Victoria Ulma alongside thousands of other individuals who chose courage over safety, compassion over compliance. The Catholic Church also began to take notice of their story. The Ulmas' decision to shelter Jewish families was seen not just as an act of wartime heroism, but as a profound expression of Christian faith in action. In December 2022, Pope Francis approved their beatification as martyrs, and on September 10th, 2023, in a ceremony held right there in Markowa, where they had lived and died, Josef and Victoria Ulma and their children were officially declared blessed by the Catholic Church. They became the first entire family to be beatified together as martyrs. In 2016, the village of Markowa opened the Ulma Family Museum of Poles Saving Jews in World War II. The museum stands as both a memorial to this particular family and a broader testament to the Polish citizens who chose to help their Jewish neighbors despite the horrific risks involved. Visitors can walk through exhibits that bring to life not just the Ulmas' story, but the experiences of other Polish rescuers and the Jewish families they saved. Perhaps most significantly, in 2018, the Polish government designated March 24th, the anniversary of the Ulmas' execution, as an official day of remembrance called Poles Who Rescued Jews Under German Occupation Remembrance Day. Every year now, on that date, Poland pauses to remember not just the Ulmas, but all the ordinary citizens who made extraordinary choices during humanity's darkest hour. Why does their story matter so much today? In part, it's because the Ulmas represent something we desperately need to remember about human nature. When we look at the Holocaust, when we try to comprehend the industrial-scale machinery of genocide, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the evil of it all. It's easy to assume that anti-Semitism and collaboration were universal, that rescue was impossible, that ordinary people were powerless against such systematic brutality. The Ulmas remind us that none of that was true, even under a regime that threatened to murder entire families for showing compassion. Some people chose compassion anyway. Even when the penalties were clearly stated and ruthlessly enforced, some people decided that their humanity demanded they take the risk. Even when it would have been completely understandable to prioritize their own children's safety above all else. Some parents decided that the world they wanted their children to inherit was one where people helped each other survive, whatever the cost. Today, when we face our own moral choices, admittedly rarely as stark as the ones the Ulmas faced, their example remains relevant. Not because we're likely to face Nazi occupation, but because we're constantly confronted with opportunities to choose between our own comfort and someone else's welfare, between staying safe and doing what's right, between looking away from injustice and taking the risk of speaking up. The Ulma family paid the ultimate price for their moral courage, but their legacy lives on in every person who learns their story and is inspired to act with greater compassion and bravery in their own life. In their small farmhouse in Markowa, they proved that even in humanity's darkest hours, the light of human decency cannot be completely extinguished. Sometimes, perhaps, that's the most important lesson history can teach us.